Why, even before opening your eyes, do you already feel a weight you can't name? And why does this tiredness insist on returning even when your routine seems organized, your body rested, and your mind supposedly at peace? There's something about this exhaustion that doesn't fit with simple physical fatigue, something you try to explain rationally, but which remains like a shadow silently watching you. Jung would say that certain signs don't appear by chance, and that what you call tiredness may only be the surface of something much deeper, something your soul is trying to reveal while you insist on ignoring it. Most people claim that waking up exhausted is normal, that it's part of modern life, that a good night's sleep is all it takes to solve everything. But what if this certainty is just a comfortable curtain created to hide a truth that no one dares to face? What if this morning exhaustion is actually a reflection of an internal conflict that you don't have the courage to name? Jung always warned that what consciousness avoids facing returns in unexpected ways, and perhaps this return is happening right now. In the first moments of your day when your mind hasn't yet managed to raise its defenses. There's a disturbing detail in this phenomenon. The feeling of waking up tired often only arises when something inside you is trying to break through a blockage you yourself have built. A blockage that may have been planted by old habits, inherited beliefs, imposed expectations, and which now reveals itself discreetly, like a symbol you haven't understood but which insists on appearing. Notice how this tiredness has its own pattern, almost like a coded message that your soul repeats until you finally decide to listen to it. The most curious thing is that the more you try to compensate for this exhaustion with willpower, the more it grows. It's as if every effort to function normally increases the distance between who you are and who you try to appear to. But Jung believed that the conflict between the conscious self and the deep self manifests in subtle symptoms. And perhaps this is the most neglected of all. Waking up already defeated by a battle you didn't even realize you were fighting. There's something in you that knows this state isn't natural land. That's precisely what keeps this restlessness alive. What if this tiredness isn't an enemy, but an invitation? What if it's the clearest sign that your soul is blocked, begging you to stop, observe, and finally understand what has been trying to reach you for so long? This video won't offer you ready-made answers, because answers never work for those who haven't yet learned to ask the right questions. But if you keep watching until the end, you might discover that this tiredness isn't the problem, it's the map. And the reason it appears at dawn is simple. It's the only time you're not pretending to be someone you're not. What you call tiredness upon waking feels like a warning that's slowly approaching, as if something ancient is trying to touch your consciousness even before your thoughts take over. You feel a weight you can't name, a kind of density in your chest, as if the air itself were thicker. And this strange sensation arises precisely at the moment when your mind should be lightest, creating a silent contradiction that you try to ignore, even while realizing there's a kind of profound misalignment between what you experience on the outside and what moves on the inside. There is a discrete force within you trying to break through the surface, trying to shake internal structures that you have kept intact for too long. This morning tiredness behaves like an omen, an echo that returns insistently because it knows you avoid noticing what is already evident. And this insistence reveals that your energy is not being drained by the external world, but by an internal part that struggles to express itself and finds no outlet, creating a living tension that manifests itself the moment you wake up. You try to explain all these symptoms logically, attributing them to stress, routine, tasks, and responsibilities. But something inside you knows that this explanation doesn't completely hold up. There's a silent conflict demanding space, an inner content that wants to emerge but encounters barriers erected by your own consciousness. This blockage creates a feeling of heaviness, because nothing that wants to be born can endure being eternally contained. And your soul knows this even when you try to deny it. This exhaustion that arises early on becomes more evident on days when you try to live mechanically, ignoring intuitive signals that appear as small warnings. These signals don't appear as random noises, but as symbols sent by deep parts of you that understand what your mind doesn't yet comprehend. And this internal message tries to reach your attention at the moment when your conscious mind is most vulnerable, before you put on the daily armor you use to survive. The weariness that accompanies you at dawn acts like a portal, as if a vestige of a forgotten dream continues to echo in your physical body. This state reveals a growing distance between the life you demonstrate and the life you truly feel. And it is precisely this rupture between appearance and essence that begins to push your inner limits, asking you to stop ignoring what is trying to subtly reveal itself. There's an almost imperceptible instant between opening your eyes and remembering who you need to be for the world, and it's precisely in that interval that your soul tries to get closer to you. In that brief moment when identities haven't yet been put back in place, Something inside you tries to reveal truths that have lain dormant for a long time. And this weight you feel doesn't arise because your body is weak, but because a part of you is trying to break the mold you repeat every day, as if it wanted to warn you that there's an excessive effort in sustaining old versions of yourself. You try to move forward, reorganizing your thoughts, adjusting your emotions, and aligning your responsibilities, but your energy insists on declining, as if something were draining your vitality without asking permission. And this drain doesn't come from outside. It comes from internal contents that have been accumulated, compressed, and silenced. When you wake up tired, what manifests is not a lack of rest, but a misalignment between your internal movement and your external direction. This misalignment creates friction that transforms into exhaustion even before the day begins. What you call tiredness may be the constant effort of maintaining identities that no longer correspond to who you have become. Jung believed that any disconnection between essence and persona expresses itself as physical and emotional discomfort. And perhaps this morning discomfort is the clearest form of this disconnection. Something within you knows that you are carrying roles, masks, and expectations that no longer belong to your current story, but your consciousness insists on maintaining them for safety. This insistence, however, turns into exhaustion. There is a silent conflict between the part of you that wants to keep functioning and the part that wants to break old patterns. This conflict creates a tension that operates in the shadows of the mind and reveals itself the moment you awaken. It's as if your soul is trying to warn you that the path you're on no longer sustains your inner truths. And no matter how much you try to compensate with willpower, discipline, or organization, the exhaustion returns, revealing that the problem isn't physical, it's symbolic. And yet, even feeling all these signs, you hesitate to look inward. There's a natural fear of confronting inner contents that could change your way of being. This fear prevents you from listening to what moves beneath the layers of routine. But the tiredness that accompanies you every morning is precisely the push your soul uses to bring you closer to this inevitable encounter with yourself, revealing that something deep wants to emerge so that you can find a new direction. There's a discomfort that approaches you gently, as if it doesn't want to scare you but insists on being noticed. This discomfort awakens when your mind is still trying to adjust to the start of the day, revealing that there's something inside you that can no longer be ignored. You feel a kind of emotional pressure that defies logical explanation, as if you were carrying thoughts that don't belong to the present. And this feeling arises because your soul is trying to reorganize contents you've kept in hidden compartments, hoping that one day you'll have the courage to revisit them. You keep trying to move forward, convinced that everything can be resolved with willpower, but your body insists on responding in another way, as if it carried a wisdom that your consciousness doesn't recognize. This physical response acts as a silent reminder that there are parts of you clamoring for expression. The more you try to adjust to the external rhythm, the more you realize that your inner self operates on a different timeline, demanding a listening that you avoid for fear of facing what you might find. There is a fissure between what you experience and what you feel, and this fissure gradually widens, revealing that it is not possible to indefinitely sustain a life based on external expectations. Jung stated that everything you refuse to acknowledge returns in symbolic forms, and this return manifests as persistent exhaustion, as if your soul were tired of carrying alone the weight of unspoken truths. This emotional state reveals a profound disconnect between your real desires and the routines you repeat. You try to reorganize your thoughts, adjust your emotions, and create strategies to overcome this exhaustion, but you realize that nothing changes, as if you were walking in circles. And this feeling of circularity arises because you're trying to correct an internal problem with external solutions. Your tiredness doesn't come from an excess of tasks, but from an excess of self-restraint. You adapt, you mold yourself, you compress yourself, and this process takes its toll, which is reflected the moment you wake up. There is an inner calling trying to guide you toward a profound review of your own history. This calling expresses itself as fatigue, as discouragement, as an inability to start the day lightly, not because you have failed, but because no strength can flourish where truth has not found space. And that is why your awakening has become so heavy. You are being invited to touch upon content you have kept hidden for a long time, content that carries clues about who you really are and about the path you need to follow. There comes a point when you realize that your fatigue doesn't respond to breaks, doesn't improve with rest, and doesn't diminish when you try to convince yourself that everything is all right. At this point reveals that your exhaustion didn't originate from the external world, but from accumulated internal tension, sustained by choices you made to survive, not to live. And this silent accumulation forms a kind of emotional fog that envelops your thoughts the moment the day begins. reminding you that something inside you got lost along the way and is insistently trying to find a space to resurface. You feel like something is pulling you down, as if a part of you is tired of carrying the weight of versions you assume out of obligation. This feeling is not weakness or lack of courage. It's the clearest sign that your soul is trapped in a cycle that no longer corresponds to what it desires. The more you try to adapt to the external rhythm, the more you realize that your energy evaporates too quickly, as if each decision you make goes against an internal movement trying to lead you somewhere else. And this contradiction expresses itself as a weariness that precedes the day itself. There's an emotional noise you try to ignore, but it intensifies every time you wake up. This noise questions choices, relationships, environments, and expectations you hold simply because you've become accustomed to them. But your inner self doesn't follow this habit, because the soul cannot tolerate living in a space that denies its truth. This noise manifests as exhaustion because the energy used to sustain lives that no longer belong to you has to come from somewhere, and it comes from your essence, which wears down while trying to warn you that it's being pushed to the background. You carry an invisible tension between what you desire and what you repeat. This tension corrodes your disposition, because no human being can live in balance when their internal movements go in the opposite direction to what the mind insists on maintaining. And even without realizing it, you wake up trapped in a web of thoughts that try to convince you that everything is under control, when in fact there is a part of you begging for change. This plea is not destructive, it is liberating. It arises as weariness because that was the only possible language to reach your attention. There's a kind of inner clamor that intensifies each morning, indicating that you're not exhausted by weakness, but rather because your soul is pushing back old walls in search of new space to breathe. This clamor isn't cruel or punitive. It's the most honest reminder that you need to reconnect with something you left behind. And even without fully understanding it, you feel this weariness awaken precisely when you try to reclaim personas that no longer resonate with what exists within you. This conflict becomes an invitation to see parts of yourself that are demanding expression, demanding a voice, demanding a return. There comes a moment when you realize that the tiredness that accompanies your awakenings is not an enemy but a messenger. It approaches you firmly, revealing that there is a growing distance between your choices and your deepest feelings. This realization arises as a discomfort that spreads slowly, reminding you that no inner strength can withstand for long when it lives compressed in routines that negate its truth. And this dense and persistent morning state acts as a mirror, reflecting everything you have tried to postpone, hide, or ignore. You feel a part of yourself trying to emerge, even though you try to keep it trapped for fear of changing the course of your life. This part expresses itself as heaviness, confusion, and lack of direction, as if calling you to a reunion you've postponed countless times. The body perceives this conflict before the mind, and therefore wakes up without energy, as if still carrying emotions you haven't allowed to transform. This exhaustion doesn't represent defeat, but rather a break with old ways of being that no longer support your growth. There's a tension between who you've become and who you truly are, and this tension becomes more evident at the start of the day before you put your usual masks back on. In this vulnerable moment, you feel more clearly that something doesn't fit, that there's a misalignment between your essence and your actions. Jung said that everything you avoid acknowledging manifests itself in other ways, seeking symbolic paths to be perceived. The persistent weariness is one of those paths, asking you to abandon ready-made answers and confront questions that have lain dormant within you. You try to move forward. You try to convince yourself that all you have to do is keep going. All you have to do is persevere. All you have to do is control. But there's something inside you silently questioning every step that doesn't align with what you truly desire. This questioning creates an inner emptiness which becomes noticeable the moment the day begins. And this feeling of emptiness isn't a lack of strength, but a lack of identification with what you repeat without reflecting. Your soul tries to show you that the direction you're following no longer sustains your internal processes, and this makes awakening heavy, slow, and emotionally dense. There is a truth that tries to get closer to you every morning, a truth that doesn't shout but persists. It manifests as a silent plea for you to stop adjusting to what tires you and start getting closer to what awakens you. Tiredness is not a sign of weakness, but of overflowing with emotions, stories, parts of yourself that demand recognition. And even without saying a word, this truth approaches you the moment you open your eyes, suggesting that the life you sustain needs to be reviewed, rearranged, and reconnected to what truly makes sense. There is a moment, almost imperceptible, when everything you've heard begins to reorganize itself within you, as if each fragment of this journey finds its own place. In that instant, you realize that the weariness that accompanied you at dawn was never an enemy, but rather a delicate sign that something within you was seeking recognition. It's as if your soul, for so long compressed between expectations and routines, has finally found space to breathe. And in realizing this, you begin to understand that this morning wait carries less pain than message, less weakness than revelation. There is an inner movement happening as you listen to these words, a subtle movement that reorganizes forgotten memories, emotions, and truths. This movement doesn't create noise, doesn't create urgency, doesn't demand immediate answers, it simply awakens. And when it awakens, it reveals that there is a path back to yourself that begins exactly where you believed you were most lost. The exhaustion that once confused you now seems to indicate that there is a light trying to shine through what you have hidden, as if your essence were trying to get a little closer to who you really are. There's a point where understanding dissolves and gives way to pure feeling, as if you finally see the design behind the weariness that accompanied you. At that point, you realize that your mornings were never just routines, but mirrors. Mirrors that reflected parts of yourself that asked for change, asked for a voice, asked for courage. And when this understanding touches your inner self, you realize that you don't wake up tired because you're falling short of life, but because the life you sustain is falling short of who you've become. Exhaustion then transforms not into an end, but into an invitation. There's something approaching you now, a kind of silent promise that nothing remains the same when you decide to listen to yourself. This promise offers no guarantees or ready-made answers, but it offers direction. It whispers that each morning can be different when you begin to walk with your own truth, even if you don't yet know how to name it. And perhaps the meaning of all this is realizing that your soul was never lost. It simply waited patiently and steadfastly for the moment when you would be ready to hear it. There's a phrase that wants to stay with you beyond this video. Not all tiredness leads to a fall. Sometimes it's the exact point where your soul decides to rise. If this content touched something within you, even in a subtle, silent, or inexplicable way, then don't let this experience end here. Enjoy this video as someone who recognizes an important step. Comment on what it awakened in you, because your words can help someone experiencing the same conflict. Share it with someone you feel needs to hear it. And subscribe to continue walking through reflections that not only inform but transform. Because from this moment on, you don't awaken alone. You awaken consciously.